Jusuf Nurkic is still in a Portland Trail Blazer uniform. He's still one of the most hotly debated Portland Trail Blazers of recent times, and I'd bet on that remaining the case. But if you want to bet on anything, check out Bet Online and use the promo code BELIEVE for a 50% reward bonus. That's BLEAV for 50% rewards. Bet Online, where the game starts. As far as Nurkic's season went, he averaged 13 points per game, 9 rebounds, and 3 assists. Per 36 minutes, he averaged 18, 12, and 4. He played in 27 minutes per game and played in 52 total games. It would have been more if the Blazers hadn't tanked the rest of the year. That number of games would have likely been above 60. This is a positive given Nurkic's injury history. As far as per 36 goals, I gave Nurkic the goal of 18.5 points. He was barely under that. I gave him a goal of 14 rebounds per 36, which is on par with some of his career numbers. He was under that number by about 2. However, it's not much of a negative, and we will talk about that in a second. I also had the goal of 4.5 assists per 36. He was barely under that at 3.9. And then I gave him goals of 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks per 36. He averaged over 1, but only 1.1 for both of those categories. His efficiency, however, was better. I gave him a goal of 56% on 2-pointers, which wasn't super high, but also higher than some of his career numbers, and he finished at 56.7%, so he passed that goal. I wanted to see him shoot 33% on 3-pointers, but volume also mattered here. He ended up shooting the heaviest volume of threes he's ever shot in his career, shooting 119 of them, making 43 of them, good for 36.1%, so he absolutely crushed that 3-point percentage goal. I wanted to see him shoot 73% on free throws. He shot 66%. I wish Nurkic was a better free throw shooter, especially with how his jump shot has developed. And I also gave him a true shooting percentage goal of 58. He passed that, shooting 58.9. The biggest positive for Nurkic, in my opinion, was his 3-point shooting development. Nurkic has always been looked at as a throw-it-back big man, and he needed to develop some sort of an outside shot to space the court. He did that this season. There was a rough moment here or there with some air balls, but 36% is pretty dang solid for a guy that wasn't looked at as a 3-point shooter heading into this season. His shot looks fluid. He was shooting it with a lot more confidence this year. I think that's a big reason for that 3-point percentage bump. And he became a guy that defenses oftentimes were not willing to leave wide open behind the 3-point arc. I want to see Nurkic replicate this 36% number on bigger volume, because that is a good enough percentage that it should draw opposing rim protectors away from the paint and make things easier on some of the Blazers scorers attacking the rim, such as Dame, Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, and Shaedon Sharpe. Who knows who's here next year, but if Nurkic is here, his 3-point shooting could be a major help for this team. I also thought Nurkic was very positionally sound defensively this year. He wasn't the flashy shot blocker or the guy that was going to switch out and lock down guards on the perimeter. I do think he was a little bit underrated in that regard, though. However, Nurkic was the Blazers' best big man in terms of just being in the right spot at the right times, recognizing things quick enough defensively, and just being all around solid. I think being in the right position on defense, making the right rotations, a lot of those little things go underrated because they're hard to notice, and I think a lot of the positives that Nurkic brought on the defensive end were some of those things that are hard to notice. Everybody notices the big time highlight block that looks like a volleyball spike that goes into the 5th row. But even the best players at getting steals and blocks only get them on a few handful of possessions. Being in the right spot and making the right decision on where to rotate and when to help shows up on a lot more of possessions, and those are the things that I truly care about, especially from a big man. Nurkic isn't a big time positive on the defensive end, but I like the little things he brings to that side of the floor. The third positive was Nurkic's short roll play, which continued to be a positive this year, with Damian Lillard being a trap magnet with defenses trying to force the ball out of his hands. Nurkic is still a reliable option out of that. Although he doesn't finish at the best going downhill, he can get to the line and he can make the right kick out pass, and all in all, it is a positive having Nurkic as a short roll big man. He makes decisions pretty quickly. I do think he made a concerted effort to try and take the ball stronger to the rim in such scenarios, which was definitely a positive and something that Blazer fans had been asking for from him for a long time. Nurkic's short roll play was definitely a positive this season. The fourth positive is his screen setting with two good guards in Dame and Ant. Being able to get them free off of screens was huge this season. I noticed a legitimate difference in the amount of space those guys had off screens times with Nurkic in the game and Nurkic out of the game. And screen setting is something that doesn't get any love. It's the dirty work. It's not the flashy thing. Everybody loves the guy that can score 30 points per game, but there's never enough love given to the guy that sets the screens to help free up those players to get 30 points per game. And the fifth and final positive for Nurkic was his rebounding. While I said he didn't achieve his rebounding goal that I had set for him, he was still the best rebounder on this Blazers team, and a lot of it isn't reflected in rebound numbers. He was the most consistent Blazer, in my opinion, in terms of boxing out and keeping other players off the boards. It wasn't necessarily Nurkic grabbing the rebounds in those situations, but it was something that was still just as good as a rebound. It was keeping the opposing offense from getting offensive rebounds. With Nurkic out of the game, and especially when he was injured, you saw an uptick in offensive rebounds for opponent teams, and it was something that drove me crazy. Nurkic is still one of the better rebounders in the league if you just look at numbers, but when you consider box outs and just being able to take up space and trying to keep opponent players off the boards, Nurkic is phenomenal. As far as the negatives for Jusuf Nurkic, the first one is his finishing. He did set a career high from 2 in shooting 56.7% from there, and that did pass my goal for him for efficiency from 2. However, there was a major uptick in efficiency across the league this season, which needs to be taken into account, and there was especially an uptick in efficiency for big men finishing around the rim, and Nurkic still graded out poorly there. According to Basketball Reference, Nurkic shot 64.5% from 0 to 3 feet, which doesn't sound terrible. It's still an efficient play when he gets the ball around there. However, it still is below average for NBA centers. Therefore, I still view it as a negative. Although it's funny how Nurkic was a much worse finisher during the Nurk Fever era, and fans loved him then. The second negative was his turnovers, and this was more of a spotty thing, but Nurkic would have games and moments where he'd be really sloppy with the ball. He'd throw passes that had no chance of getting through, especially the little one-hand lob passes that didn't get to the baseline. You know, the ones where he's throwing it to a backdoor cutter, but he's kind of throwing it into the middle of the paint instead of over the top of the defense. He had turnovers like that. Those passes never get through for him. And obviously, the offensive fouls on screens were a problem this year. However, I don't think Nurkic gets a friendly whistle on those. The turnovers weren't a huge, massive issue for Nurkic. However, with him being the fourth offensive option in the starting lineup, you don't want to see him turning over the ball a ton, and I do think there were some stretches where he really struggled with turning the ball over. And there were some stretches where he was fine as well, but overall it is something for him to try and improve on, especially just deciding what passes to try and throw, because I feel like there's a clear pattern in terms of what passes end up in turnovers for Jusuf Nurkic. The third negative was his fouling, which didn't seem as much of an issue until I looked at the stats for this video. He didn't foul out in many games this season. However, he did average 3.6 fouls per game, which is a career high if you take out the 8 games he played in the bubble. That's a whopping 4.8 fouls per 36 minutes. However, I can't put all of the blame on Jusuf Nurkic because the Blazers gave up the highest amount of attempts at the rim in the league this season. Nurkic constantly had to deal with guys driving right at him, trying to protect the rim multiple times a game, much more than probably any center in the league, and being constantly put in that position is going to lead to some foul trouble, especially with the friendly whistle that a lot of slashers in the league get nowadays. So part of this is a negative just in regards to the entire Blazers team, putting Nurkic in positions to get into foul trouble consistently. However, Nurkic does contribute to his own issues, sometimes trying a little too hard to set great screens and therefore moving and fouling, and would still have his occasional emotional frustration foul. I do think he cleaned those up this year compared to some previous years where that was much more of an issue. However, you would like to see him completely eliminate frustration fouls and emotional fouls from his game entirely, because he's somebody the Blazers needed on the court this year without much depth behind him, and there was some games where they did have to limit his minutes due to foul trouble. And the fourth and final negative is his foul shooting. As I said, 66%, that's not good enough. I would like to see him improve from the charity stripe. Going forward, Nurkic has 3 years left on his contract. Next year, he'll make approximately $17 million. And while this is probably a slight overpay, it's nothing that the Blazers should panic about and just simply try and get rid of like a lot of fans have suggested. The Blazers needed big man depth. Getting rid of Nurkic just to get rid of his salary doesn't really accomplish anything. It doesn't clear up any additional cap space. It doesn't change the equation in terms of what the Blazers can and cannot do this offseason outside of potentially having $4 million extra that they can spend in terms of their mid-level exception. And trading Nurkic to dump his salary would just create a hole at the starting center spot, a hole that would be hard enough to fill that it wouldn't justify opening up an extra $4 million in mid-level exception money. I think with better defenders around him, Nurkic is going to look like a better player. I think some fans got a little frustrated with him not being able to carry the defense. However, that is not the type of defender Jusuf Nurkic is, and there's very few defensive bigs in the league that can actually truly carry a defensive unit. If you get a guy on this Portland Trail Blazers roster that can actually defend on the ball and get through screens instead of just allowing ball handlers to drive downhill right at Jusuf Nurkic, and if you maybe get another rim protector that can step up next to Nurkic, or maybe a backup center where the Blazers don't have to rely so much on Jusuf Nurkic to do everything defensively, then I think Nurkic would look a lot better on this Blazers team. I do expect Jusuf Nurkic back next year. I will have a video or two talking about Jusuf Nurkic and his trade value and trade market. However, in short, I just don't think many teams are looking for a type of center like a Jusuf Nurkic at his price point. That's not a knock on Nurkic. That's more so just the state of teams in the NBA. A lot of contending teams already have entrenched centers or guys that they like, guys maybe on cheaper contracts that provide similar value. So Jusuf Nurkic, especially on his probably slightly overpaid contract, isn't going to really have any trade value, and the Blazers don't have the assets to just get rid of him for nothing and then fill in that gap somewhere else. The Blazers need to use their assets wisely, and they need to do it in trades that help the small forward position and the bench, and hopefully get a guy that can defend on the ball and get through screens. Nurkic's salary is also very meaningful for this team, and it's the only salary between $7 and $25 million that the Blazers can trade this offseason. That is very useful in terms of matching salary. Of course, for some bigger salary players, the Blazers could include Anthony Simons, but I think there are scenarios for players making $25, $30 million a year where maybe the Blazers would like to try and keep Anthony Simons. That would only be possible being able to include Jusuf Nurkic's salary in said trades, and then players making around $20 million a year where Simons doesn't make sense to trade for them. Jusuf Nurkic's salary is very valuable as a matching piece for that. Now, if you get into lower tier salaries, $10 to $15 million, you can match that by adding up Nasir Little as well as some smaller salary pieces, maybe a $3 million from Kevin Knox. That gets you close to $10 million in outgoing salary. So there are some salary combinations for players making less than Jusuf Nurkic. However, in general, just having that extra salary piece on the roster does make it easier to formulate the trades the way that the Blazers want to without giving up assets in order to match salary that they otherwise wouldn't. As far as what Jusuf Nurkic should work on this offseason, I would like to see him maybe lose a little bit of weight. It's always been a hot topic as to what the best playing weight is for Jusuf Nurkic. However, I would like to see him get a little bit of that burst and spring in his jump back. I don't know if it'll ever return. I don't know if losing weight would help that return at all, but he used to be an elite defender, the most underrated defender in the league about 3 or 4 years ago, and he just doesn't have the same verticality as a rim protector as he used to, and he isn't as quick off the floor as he used to be. So if he can figure out a way to regain some of that, that would be huge for this Blazers team that needs as much help defensively as possible. Also, working on free throws and just making sure that three-point shot is truly dialed in and something he can maintain at a consistent rate would be huge. And then finding the types of finishes where he struggled most and trying to work on those would also be beneficial for him. My grade for Jusuf Nurkic this past season is a B-. This season was about what I expected from Nurkic. However, I do give them a better than average grade because of his three-point shooting development. Let me know what you grade Jusuf Nurkic's season down in the comment section below. Let me know what your thoughts are on Jusuf Nurkic's game. Let me know what you think of him moving forward. If you want to trade him, do you think he's the right big man for this Portland Trail Blazers team? Let me know down in that comment section. Leave a like on this video, it helps me out, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. We're in the middle of daily uploads that'll run all the way through the start of August. If you've missed any of the previous player previews, there is a link in the description box below. And once again, thank you to BetOnline for sponsoring this player preview. Remember that promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for a 50% reward bonus. With that being said, I'm out of here. I'll catch you tomorrow in the next player preview. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.